Member for Dawson.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise to speak on the appropriations bills. I guess that the federal Morrison Liberal National Government is investing very heavily in a range of different environmental measures, notably on the Great Barrier Reef. And what we do when we do that is we try to work with industry to see that there can be improvements in environmental outcomes, for instance with the agricultural sector, and at the same time driving growth in their profits as well. When you get that double whammy, a great impact for the environment and a great impact for the bottom line of farmers, that's where you get real change, real sustainable, meaningful change that's going to last the long term, not just until the funding that might be on offer dries up. A different approach is taken by the state Labor government. Just as we've seen the mining industry demonised by the Green left and blamed for everything from the destruction of the Great Barrier Reef to bushfires, cyclones and floods, we're also witnessing the demonisation of our farmers, both graziers and more particularly today I want to speak about sugarcane farmers. The judge, jury and prosecutioner in the form of the Queensland Labor Government and its Department of Environment and Science have determined that it is indeed farmers who are guilty of just about every evil that afflicts the reef, and in particular they are responsible for the quality of water which flows into our water catchments. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, they make their pronouncement and outline their prescribed course of punishment with no conclusive or extensive data or studies on water quality. Although some monitoring of water does go on, it is piecemeal and it varies from catchment to catchment. So in the absence of data, the department does modelling, it makes predictions, it determines that the evil farmers are guilty and they must be held to account. It's akin to a witch hunt, Mr Deputy Speaker. This is the treatment growers face after the vast majority of them, about 70%, have spent the last 6 years or so changing their farming practices, taking ownership for the land their families have farmed for decades, and I've got to say they treat it with great respect. I'd like to step through the process of the Queensland Labor Government deciding to introduce yet another set of regulations on an already heavily regulated industry. In February this year, the Queensland Labor Government introduced the Environmental Protection, Great Barrier Reef Protection Measures and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2019. They wanted to meet a reef water quality target. However, the Queensland Labor Government had already introduced regulations in 2010 which essentially required farmers to become scientists, chemists and bookkeepers in order to grow their own cane. While we all understand that industries develop and refine their processes and practices, the requirements are now extensive and time-consuming. Cane farmers are already required to do the following. They've got to undertake soil testing within 1 year of planting. They need to use the results of those soil tests to calculate the optimum amount of nitrogen and phosphorus in accordance with the Environmental Protection Act. They're going to keep the soil test reports and records of the calculation of the optimum amount of nitrogen and phosphorus for a period of no less than 5 years. They've got to apply no more than the optimum amount of nitrogen and phosphorus according to those tests. They've got to keep records of all the agricultural chemicals, fertilisers and soil conditioners applied, including the amount, the product analysis, the date and the method of application for a period of no less than 5 years. And they've got to have a map showing the boundary of each block where soil testing and fertiliser and soil conditioner application has occurred. Naturally, that task is more difficult for some than others. We don't all enjoy juggling chemical calculations and record keeping, and those practices will probably come more readily to some. We must remember that we are already asking people to change a lifetime of practices to abide by new regulations, quite heavy-handed regulations. Despite the difficulties and challenges, 8 years on we've got about 70% of growers going through the process of meeting the requirements which have been set before them. They've become involved in a number of industry-led initiatives such as the Smart Cane Best Management Practice and the Reef Alliance Project. In November last year I joined other innovators in the cane industry, 130 of them, from Mossman in the north through to Kamala south and Mackay, who are in Parliament House being congratulated for their efforts under Project Catalyst, which was celebrating its 10th anniversary. Project Catalyst was founded by Coca-Cola and by a group that I don't normally commend in this place, the World Wildlife Foundation. It was designed to reduce the impact of agricultural runoff, and their findings are that through working together, sharing information, developing farming processes and practices and boosting crop production, they've improved 150 billion litres of water quality. These are growers that have done this, growers. 150 billion litres of water quality. They're very proud of what they have achieved, what they are achieving, and rightly so. Now, I stood with Cane Growers Queensland Chairman Paul Schembri, along with the then Minister for Environment, in March this year for an announcement of further Morrison Liberal National Government funding for 11 programs, which are all about practical initiatives and a collaborative approach of working with landholders and farmers to improve soils, protect land and protect waterways. That funding was coming through the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. One of those programs is the Cane Changer project. It's based on mutual respect and recognition of growers' achievements. Sadly, this is not what our growers get from the Queensland Labor Government. What they are faced with is more rules and regulations, further uncertainties and in fact downright fear about whether once again they might be put in situations where they're scared to farm because they might break the rules. As Paul Schembri explained to committee members holding an inquiry into that state government bill, the current Act provides for requirements such as environment risk management plans, soil testing, nutrient calculators, record keeping, the prescribed use of chemicals, chemical accreditation, mandatory setback areas and grower audits. We are very confused and perplexed as to why a high threshold that now exists is to be superseded by an extremely high threshold. If the Queensland Labor Government's proposed bill is passed, this is actually what awaits our cane growers. An invasion of privacy, the introduction of Big Brother as the people that farmers work alongside with, the agronomists, the extension officers, the resellers of chemicals and fertilisers, are going to be required to keep records of who buys what, and they'll be required to produce those records or essentially dob in a grower. Dob in a grower. Sugar mills that growers supply to are also going to be required to hand over data on request from the government. Dob in a grower, treating them like criminals. The bill will also give a public servant, the head of the Environment Department, the power to simply go ahead and change those rules, move the goalposts on regulations, with limited requirement to consult, and absolutely no accountability on the impacts that rule changes will inflict upon farmers and their communities. Can it get any worse? Well, yes it can. It can, Mr Deputy Speaker. Growers are also going to need to obtain an environmental authority licence to grow cane on their own land if that land has not been cropped for 3 of the previous 10 years, including 1 of the previous 5 years. The avenue then for growth of the sugar industry is pretty much zip. Where a licence is required, the grower will need to show they can manage the water quality risks through farm design and practice standards. I mean, the degree of dictatorship here is just simply unbelievable. A bureaucrat in a city office goes and reads the Green Left Weekly. He's probably never stepped onto a cane farm in his or her entire life. He's going to have the power to tell farmers how they can farm their own land, what land they can farm on, and that is just an insult. And the next insult to growers, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that the state Labor government wants to expand the regions of Queensland which will fall under these draconian reef regulations. The department, in their infinite environmental wisdom, have determined that the southern cane growing regions of Bundaberg, Isis and Maryborough, already struggling with drought conditions and soaring electricity prices, are going to face these reef regulations for the first time. Cane growers, which represents 80% of growers in this country, believes this southern expansion is a low priority and unjustified expense to the public purse and to growers in the region. It appears that there is a push on to get this bill through the Parliament, the state parliament, as soon as possible, Mr Deputy Speaker. One can only assume, considering a state election looms in little over 12 months' time, that Queensland Labor wants to get this nasty attack on the autonomy of farmers over and done with in the mistaken belief that growers and others in their communities might lick their wounds and that all will be forgotten come the state election in October 2020. Well, I certainly doubt that, and they should too. After this bill was introduced in the Queensland Parliament on February 27th, it was referred to the Innovation, Tourism Development and Environment Committee. The committee planned to hold just one hearing. And where did they decide to have that hearing? I'll give you a couple of guesses, but you probably won't need to take it too long, because you come from a region as well, Mr Deputy Speaker, in Queensland. And guess where the state government decided to consult on this agricultural bill that affects rural communities? Yes, I know that you would have guessed it right, Mr Deputy Speaker. They held it in Brisbane, far from the vast majority of cane fields, far from the vast majority of farmers along the coast, certainly a long, long way from the affected areas of the Burnett Mary region, from the Mackay region, the Burdekin region, the Wet Tropics region. And after an outcry from growers, the committee then hastily agreed to hold another few sets of public hearings in Cairns, Townsville, Mackay and Bundaberg. Thank goodness. But if growers and the representative groups thought that that was to be a sign that perhaps their concerns were going to be heard, they were going to be listened to, well, they were sadly mistaken. Though the committee sat and heard the accounts of farmers, their objections, their concerns, the requests for considerations of other methods and other avenues, despite hundreds of submissions, hundreds of people turning up to these public hearings, particularly in Townsville and Mackay, in my electorate, the committee came back with a short, stark recommendation. The committee recommends that the bill be passed. Well, in the interests of the cane farmers in this nation's biggest sugar-growing region in this country, and also on behalf of cattlemen and cattlewomen, I want to raise some of the concerns that they have shared with me and objections that have been raised in those hearings. The Cane Growers Organisation, in their submission to that inquiry, said it is not reasonable that a grower's ability to farm profitably will be at the whim of a government department with no explicit consideration of economic and social impacts, no process for independent review and no recourse for appeal by affected industries and individuals. Cattlewoman Josephine Angus said, "We are under pressure. I have many quality assurance manuals on my desk. I would love to be out riding a horse or driving a grader and doing some earthworks that might actually stop a bit of sediment to the reef instead of checking lists and ticking boxes." Paul Skembry, Chairman of Cane Growers, said Australian cane farmers are acknowledged as being world-class in terms of innovation and in terms of embracing technologies and farming practices that are second to none. I make the observation that we are lauded and applauded as being the best, perhaps the best in the world when it comes to environmental sustainability. It is somewhat irritating that when we come back to Queensland, our environmental prowess is considered to be second-rate. Manager in Victor Cane Growers, Michael Kern, said a lot of our growers have questioned the science and questioned the testing results and employed independent peer-reviewed testers to come onto their properties and undertake testing. It might come as a surprise, but they found different results to that of the government's testing. They are satisfied themselves, particularly around nitrogen coming off the properties. Russ McNee from Briar, the Burdekin River Irrigation Area irrigator, said the proposed amendment bill confirms irrigators' long-held concerns the government will continue to raise the compliance bar despite the commitment and best effort of irrigators to improve water quality and minimise irrigation runoff. Anyone who feels strongly about supporting our traditional industries and curtailing the Green Left push to impose regulation after regulation on our farmers and other industry groups should call state members of parliament and ask them to take a stand against the demonisation of the agricultural sector and farmers. People can sign the National Farmers Federation #RejectTheRegs petition, which notes this push by the Queensland Labor Government puts farmers at the risk of bureaucratic intrusion into their everyday business decisions for no guarantee of water quality benefits. As the NFF states in their petition about these regs, it's a grab for private business data which will give government the power to shift the goalposts again and again and is simply not needed. The Palaszczuk Trad Queensland Labor Government should get serious about listening to the concerns of our farmers. The bureaucrats are fond of saying the industry knew it was coming. They state they've been in discussions since 2016, but discussions are not an agreement. The Queensland Labor Government's idea of consultation is this, Mr Deputy Speaker. We meet, you talk, we don't listen, we just do whatever we want. That is how they have dealt with farmers. It is an appalling way to do business with any constituent. It's particularly appalling to do this sort of business with the people that put food on our table, the farmers, which in total generates $10 billion of output for our state's economy. which employs hundreds of people up and down the Queensland seaboard. This is a disgraceful way. Farmers will remember it if they go ahead with these onerous regulations, and they will take it out at the ballot box.
I thank the member for Dawson.